Hello and welcome to News OK. I'm Dale Denwalt, your Capitol reporter for the Oklahoman, and sitting next to me is Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin. Thanks for coming in and talking to us today. We're kind of in the 11th hour of the legislative session, right? Just a few more days until you have to have an idea of what kind of revenue is going to come out.
Not only are we in the 11th hour, we're 11 days out, actually. And that was one of the messages I gave to the legislature and the state of Oklahoma is, look, we got to get our job done. We got to make some decisions. I know it's not easy. There are a lot of tough decisions that we have to make, but we also have to think about what kind of state do we want to be? Do we want to be a state that educates their children, that takes care of public safety, that funds services for health and human services, taking care of the poor, the elderly, the disabled? Do we want to continue to finish our infrastructure projects that we have in process right now? You know, what kind of state do we want to be? A third world state, or do you want to be a first-class quality state that people want to move to and live in? And you know, Dale, we're here in downtown Oklahoma City, and I've been using this scenario lately that if you drive to downtown Oklahoma City, or if you drive to Tulsa, or even if you drive to Durant, and there's other pockets around the state, Norman for an example, and you drive around and you see all the cranes, all the buildings going up, all the new restaurants, all the new music places, all the hotels. There's construction everywhere, all the housing downtown Oklahoma City. I can't even keep up with all the businesses and things that are being invested in. Same thing in Tulsa, same thing in other pockets of the state. You would think everything's just great, right? Mm-hmm. Because it looks real exciting, and it is a great, exciting place to live. But when you look at our budget, and we look at the structure, and we look that we have a budget shortfall, but yet we have a 4.3% unemployment rate, the two just don't max up, and it's hard to decipher, you know, what the problem is. So I've been saying for the last 3 years to the legislature, look, our revenue structure is broken because we depend so much on sales tax, and there's so much online shopping now, and then you compound that with the 3-year downturn we've had in the oil and gas industry, where we had a high back many years ago to where it was $107 a barrel, down at one point to $27 a barrel, to now just $47 a barrel. And you take all that revenue loss, some of the companies that have shut down, and the trickle-down effect of that revenue loss itself, you know, we got a crisis in our budget that we have to fix it, or we're going to continue to have these budget shortfalls year after year, and it's embarrassing for our state, and it gives so much uncertainty to our business community, to say our road contractors that are out there trying to fix our roads and bridges, and to our teachers who are wondering if they're going to get their contract renewed for being able to teach. And we have to provide some certainty to know what kind of money we're going to have. And so I've been telling the legislature, look, we got 11 days to go where you can pass revenue raising measures, about 16 days otherwise till the end of the session. But we got to make some decisions. Otherwise, we're just going to have to cut about close to almost $1 billion out of our budget and not fund some of the things that we think are important priorities for our state.
Yeah, and I think you'd almost have to be living under a rock to not know the situation. But you know, we've got almost $1 billion budget shortfall, and the legislature really hasn't sent you very much as far as revenue. You said they've sent you some fees. They sent you you signed a cut to the film rebate in Oklahoma could bring in about $1 million.
$1 million out of 878.
Yeah, and really, you know, looking at everything that has gotten out of the legislature and onto your desk is not much.
Not much.
And you're really pressing the issue, telling lawmakers to
do their job. Do their job. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. And what's the main sticking point, though? You know, a lot of this happens in the back room negotiations, understandably. But you know, what's the big sticking point here? Why haven't you gotten more revenue bills?
Well, I think there are a lot of people that don't want to make tough decisions at the Capitol, and we can either be part of the problem or we can be part of the solution. And what I'm finding is be part of the problem right now at the Capitol. We got to put aside, I should say, our partisan politics. We can't play this game. I'm not going to vote for this, even though I support it, unless you vote for that. I mean, we just got to quit doing that. We got to do what's best for Oklahoma, come together as Democrats, Republicans, all work together as Oklahomans to be able to fund the core services that are essential for our state, while also making sure we're very business friendly. We've got the business friendly part down. That's why we see all the investment in Oklahoma City, all the investment in Tulsa and Durant and other surrounding communities. We've done a lot of great things for the business in our economy, and we've done some great things to encourage more graduation, more degrees, more certificates from our career techs. We're doing those things right, but we got to fix the structure of the budget. And so for 3 years now, I've been telling them this, and now we're reaching a point of crisis that if we don't address it this year, as you know, Dale, next year is election year. And you've got all the statewide elected officials that were elected when I was elected in 2011 that are term limiting out of office.
Right.
So you'll have all these elections for all the statewide elected officials. You have 45 new freshman legislators that'll be up for their first re-election, and then you have some that'll be terming out and some that may just win or lose. And if we think we're going to address this budget whole and be able to fix the budget next year, in election year, I think people are going to be shocked that if we can't even do it this year, we're certainly not going to do it next year.
Could be a lot harder. And you know, it's easy to see sort of the partisan divide over what's happening at the legislature.
It's unfortunate.
But there's also a House and Senate divide
There is.
between the two chambers that's a little bit less talked about, but I'm sure quite as prevalent. You know, the Senate leadership may want something that the House leadership doesn't want, and there could be sticking points there, right?
Well, there's got to be some give and take for everybody. You know, I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of state do we want to be? And people need to be asking their legislators the same question, and what's your solution? You know, I put out a big plan in February. I laid out what I call a smorgasbord of ideas of things we could do to close a big budget gap. I didn't even like some of them myself. I mean, I'm a conservative Republican. There are a lot of things I had to say, here's some ideas, you know, choose which one you want. But a lot of them I didn't even like. But somebody's got to have an idea. Somebody's got to have a plan. It took a long time for anybody to even put a couple little bitty ideas out there, but we still hadn't seen everybody come together and gel behind something. And so that's why I gave a siren call yesterday. Look, we got 11 days left. You can't pass revenue raising measures the last 5 days of session. You got to do your job. You need to start now. And if we don't, the consequences are dire, and there will be collateral damage to the state and to our services. So we have to ask our question, do we want 4-day school weeks for our kids, or do we want 5-day school weeks? Do we want to tell the Highway Patrol you can only drive 100 miles a day because we need to save on gas? Or do we want them out on the highways being able to help us if we have a car breakdown or if we have something more dire than that? Do we want to fund our prisons and our corrections so that we make sure we have enough prison guards guarding our really dangerous inmates that are in our prison systems? Do we want to take care of the disabled, the poor, and the elderly? Do we want to have substance abuse treatment services for people who have sons or daughters, mothers, fathers that are addicted, but yet they're waiting in these long periods of lines, you know, to see if they can get on a list and maybe get some help? Do we want to finish Broadway extension? Do we want to finish all the roads and bridges up in Tulsa and other areas across the state? Those are the decisions we have to make, but the answer to that question is we won't be able to if we don't enact some revenue raising to be able to close the budget gap, because the way we've done it, as you know, at the Capitol is that we'll say, okay, I'll give you an example. Last year we funded Department of Human Services, which takes care of abused children and the blind and the disabled. We funded them for 10 months, not the 12 months of the year, 10 months. We didn't give them any increases, but we only gave them 10 months of funding. And we can't play those types of games where we do smoke and mirrors, or it's like at the football games where they have the 3 cups and you put the golf ball in, you move them around and you try to figure out where the golf ball is. Right. That's what we do at the Capitol. 3-card monte, is that what they call that?
Shell game, maybe?
Yeah.
Anyway, speaking of all of that, you know, you've talked about these hypotheticals here that, you know, if we were to not pass any new revenue, there's a list here of something like 30 agencies that wouldn't get any additional money as long as we kept sort of these core agencies at current funding levels. And you talk about keeping everything, keeping core services funded.
Well, absolutely. And I showed this yesterday when we were at the press conference. I talked about, and if you'll, well, what I talked about is, if you scroll up a little bit, there it is. what I consider to be the top 7 funding priorities of the state. I think everything people can agree upon. Education, healthcare authority, which is your Medicaid and your health services, higher education, human services, our corrections department, our mental health department, which funds substance abuse and other mental health services, transportation. Those are core function, core missions of the state government. And if you put that back up one more time, I will show you something. So if you kept all those agencies flat, in other words, even though we have close to a $900 million shortfall, if you didn't cut just those agencies, you just said, okay, you get what you had last year, nothing more, nothing less, just keep it flat. Now show the second screen. I'll show you what happens to government. All those different agencies listed below, which is somewhere close to 50, you'd have to cut all those other government functions, and they're important functions. You know, you got the public safety, DPS, public safety department, you got the tax commission, you got the district attorney's council, veterans affairs, rehabilitation affairs, department of commerce, department of tourism, Supreme Court, House of Representatives, the Senate, the governor, lieutenant governor, everything. You'd have to cut all those agencies to zero to hold those top core functions just flat, not give them any increases, and then you still have a $19 million shortfall. So that's the seriousness of this problem, that's the crisis of this problem, and we have to fix the structure of the budget. And I've laid out a lot of different ideas, as everybody talks about, and I got a lot of people griping at me at the beginning of the session, but I wasn't joking. This is really true. This is really a serious thing. And then we got some people, you know, that say, well, I'm not going to vote for that. Even though I'm for it, I'm not going to vote for it because you won't do this, and vice versa. So we have to come together and do what's best for the state.
And you know, you've got some new expenses that you expect. Real ID needs to be funded. There are folks who want the managed care system, the privatization basically of certain Medicaid populations. It will cost, I think, like $50 million.
Just start it up and then it'll save us money on the back end.
Yeah, and you know that
the health labs is in need of certification, and we have to have a better health lab. That's very important because that's how we are able to track disease. You know, maybe it's measles, maybe it's mumps, I mean, it could be the flu, it could be West Nile virus, it could be all those different things. It has to be certified, it has to meet the qualifications of federal guidelines for us to be able to run those tests and have the services we need. We ran into this problem years ago with the medical examiner's office. You know, if you lose a loved one and you want to find out why, what happened, you know, we had a huge backlog, we lost accreditation in that. I finally got that fixed. But that's some of the seriousness of some of these issues that we had to fund and address.
Quick question here, is there anything that you've told the legislature no, or is there any revenue source that you would veto?
Well, I've made it a point that I don't want to have what's called one-time funds, which is what we've done for decades upon decades upon decades out the Capitol, and I've been trying to get them to stop doing that in the budgeting process. In other words, it's money that will not be there next year. It's not recurring revenue that comes in year after year after year, kind of like your paycheck, month after month, you get the same amount. It's money that's just one-time money. It'd be like if someone gave you $5,000 this year and you decide you're going to go buy a new house, but that $5,000 is not going to be there next year to make that house payment. I mean, that's what we do at the Capitol. So I'm telling them, stop it. Let's fix this. Let's make it work. The uncertainty causes all kinds of havoc and grief throughout our school systems, our other services, public safety, as I mentioned, all those different things. Let's fix this problem. And then the other thing I've been telling them to do is, ask them not to do, is to tie our hands with saying you can only spend this money for this particular thing, because as needs change in government and you need to shift money around, many times they'll dedicate money to a certain thing and then you can't move that money around, and so it causes a lot of problem. And then we've robbed what we call the unclaimed property fund to some pretty hefty amounts at different times, and I think it's valid to take some of that money, but you got to be careful about that too. So I think just fixing the problem up front is the best solution for our state, and not harming business is certainly something that we want to consider too.
Right. One last question here that I wanted to get you on the record on. Yesterday you vetoed a bill, Senate Bill 2, that would have eliminated the history assessment.
Right.
And you know, the author of the bill said, you know, this will save $2 million or so. and you say we still need the history test.
Absolutely.
But Oklahoma has been kind of moving away from end of instruction tests. But why keep the very last one, this history test?
Well, my purpose of vetoing that bill is I think it's important our kids know the history of our nation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they need to know why we have a democracy, why we have freedom, why we have a constitution, the battles, the wars, even the current wars that we're in, even the current conflicts that we're in. How did we get to be a state? We were Indian Territory, we became a state of Oklahoma in 1907. How did all that happen, whether it's Oklahoma history, American history? I just think it's important to know history. Now, what they're wanting to do is take away testing. Well, we know that in the state of Oklahoma, 62% of our students pass our history test. That's not particularly good. That means there's a huge amount of kids that can't pass it. So if you take away the incentive to know the material, because you're not going to get a test on it anyway, what do you think will happen? Students won't care. They'll show up, they'll check the box, say, okay, I sat in that class. I don't know anything, but I sat in the class. And I think it does a disservice to our state.
Very good. All right, well, unless you have any parting words, that'll be it. I guess you're in communication with leadership in the House and the Senate, and even the minority leadership, I'm sure. Is there any single message that you want to tell the people of Oklahoma about what you're telling them?
Well, I think the biggest thing the people of Oklahoma need to understand is that we got about 11 days left to finish our work at the Capitol. If they're concerned about having funding for schools, having funding for public safety, having funding for all the construction you're seeing going on with our infrastructure, taking care of the essential services for those who are needy, then we can't just cut away out of this problem. I mean, I think it's important to create efficiency, certainly eliminate waste that we have, and we've done a lot of that. We have charts that shows how many cuts, how much of a cut we've given to all of our different state agencies, and we can always use more. We can always have more room for efficiency, but unless the legislature sends me a bill to do that, I can't do anything about it. So now we're left with this issue that we have almost $900 million shortfall. I think the people of Oklahoma need to call their legislator and tell them what's important to them. If we want to cut $900 million, we can do that. But keep in mind, education is 50% of all of our spending in Oklahoma. It's our biggest priority in Oklahoma. So if 50% of your spending is that, then there'll probably be some substantial cuts to education. Certainly public safety, Medicaid, those type of things are high dollar ticket items in our budget. So call your legislator, talk to them, tell them, get the job done, tell them what you can accept, what you can't accept, and what you think is plausible to be able to close this budget gap.
Very good. Well,
and then say a prayer.
Certainly, Governor Mary Fallin, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about this budget. I know we'll probably hear from you again over the next 2 or 3 weeks as we try to find some money for the state of Oklahoma. Well, I'm Dale Denwalt, Capitol reporter for the Oklahoman. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for reading.